Late 1966, somewhere over the Red River Delta, a flight of F-105 Thunder Chiefs, heavy with bombs, runs in toward a rail yard. And then the call every pilot in North Vietnam dreads cracks through the radio. MiGs! MiGs! 6 o'clock! Before anyone sees them, silver darts slash through the formation. One pass, one Thunder Chief trailing smoke, and the darts nose over and go home. Nobody gets a shot back. There's nothing to shoot at. This was the air war over North Vietnam in late 1966, and it was a war America was losing, one F-105 at a time. To understand how bad it got, you need to understand the rules, because the United States was fighting this war with one hand tied behind its back, and the hand doing the tying was Washington. President Lyndon Johnson ran the bombing campaign, Operation Rolling Thunder, like a game he was terrified of winning. Targets were picked in the White House, not in the cockpit. There were circles on the map where American bombs simply were not allowed to fall. Hanoi had a sanctuary ring, and the MiG airfields, Phuc Yen, Kep, Gia Lam, sat inside the circles, untouched. American pilots could watch MiGs take off. They could watch them climb, form up, and come in to attack. And they could not touch the runways. On top of that came the rules of engagement. No shooting at blips on a radar screen. Before you fired, you had to see the enemy with your own eyes and call out what he was. On a clear day, that's fair. Over North Vietnam in 1966, under an overcast with ground controllers feeding MiGs in from every direction, it was a handicap that got people killed. And the enemy adapted faster than Washington did. When surface-to-air missiles started killing Thunder Chiefs, the F-105s got a new radar jamming pod, the QRC-160. It worked. Their losses to missiles nearly stopped, so the missiles moved. They moved on to the F-4 Phantoms, which didn't have enough pods to go around, and when the Thunder Chiefs flew tight and defended, the MiGs changed too. They learned to wait low under the clouds, pop up behind the last pair of aircraft in the formation, take one firing pass, and dive away before the escorts could turn into them. Wolves picking off the last deer of the herd. That was the tactic, and it was working. The numbers told the story. The Air Force built 833 F-105 Thunder Chiefs, the entire production run. Close to 400 of them were lost in Southeast Asia, nearly half. The pilots who flew them called the airplane a lead sled, and by the winter of 1966, they had started calling it a death trap too. And the F-4 Phantom, the best air superiority fighter America had ever built, spent its days flying escort, a shepherd, a babysitter for bombers. In October 1966, a new commander landed at Ubon Royal Thai Air Base in Thailand. The 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, the Wolfpack, was the biggest Phantom wing in the war, and it was bleeding. The new colonel was 44 years old. His name was Robin Olds, and he had been waiting for this war his entire life. Olds was fighter royalty. His father had been a general in the Army Air Corps. Robin went to West Point, played football there well enough to make the papers, and graduated in 1943 straight into the cockpit of a P-38 Lightning over Europe. He was 23 when he scored his first kills. By the time the war ended, he had a dozen. Every airplane he ever flew, he named Scat. In 1966, the Air Force handed him a wing, and a war that was going wrong. Olds flew combat missions himself. He watched the patterns, and he arrived at a conclusion that most of the command structure was too polite to say out loud. You cannot catch the MiGs. They fight only when they choose. They come up only when the prey is fat, slow, and loaded with bombs. So stop chasing them. Set a table instead. If MiGs only rise to hunt bombers, Olds reasoned, then we'll give them bombers. He had to make an F-4 Phantom, a fighter that looked nothing like an F-105, flew nothing like one, and sounded nothing like one, become a Thunder Chief on every radar scope in North Vietnam. He took the idea to his boss, Major General William Momeyer, the 7th Air Force commander, himself a fighter pilot and a former commander of the very same wing. Momeyer listened. In December 1966, he said yes. The operation got a name, Bolo, after a Filipino blade that looks like a clumsy club and cuts like a razor. December 1966. While the wing flew its normal missions by day, Olds locked a handful of his sharpest officers in a room. Among them, a young planner named Captain John Stone. Their job? build a disguise, detail by detail. And they started with the right question. Not, what do we want the North Vietnamese to see? But, what do they already see every single day?
Because here's the thing about deception. You don't invent something new. You repeat something familiar.
The North Vietnamese Ground-Controlled Interception, GCI, had watched hundreds of F-105 strikes. They knew the signature better than the Americans did. The ingress route from Laos, threading the ridgelines, the cruising altitude, the airspeed, the radio frequencies, the call signs, the chatter, the electronic emissions, even the timing of the chaff drops. Every one of those details was a thread in the costume. Miss one, and the spider notices. So the Phantoms took all of it. The F-4Cs would fly the Thunder Chief route. Thunder Chief altitude, Thunder Chief speed. The pilots had to hold their fighters back, fly a profile that felt wrong in every instinct they had. They would talk like Thud pilots on the radio, drop chaff on the Thud schedule. And this was the key. They would carry the QRC-160 jamming pods that only F-105s had been carrying. On a North Vietnamese radar scope, a formation of F-4s wearing those pods looked exactly like a formation of Thuds. Same smear, same signature, same dinner bell. The force split in two. The West Force, 7 flights of F-4Cs from Olds' own 8th Wing at Ubon, would come in from Laos. That was the bait, a perfect imitation of a strike package headed for Phuc Yen. The East Force, 7 flights from the 366th Wing out of Da Nang, would come in from the Gulf of Tonkin side. Their job was the door, cover the other airfields, and cut the escape route MiG pilots used to run for China. If the MiGs took the bait, the West Force would turn on them, and the East Force would be waiting behind them. The flights got call signs. American cars, Olds, Ford, Lincoln, Rambler, Tempest, Plymouth, Vespa. And here was the detail that irritated the colonel personally. One of those flights carried his own name. Robin Olds had to fly into combat as Olds Flight, and every time he keyed the radio, the whole sky heard it. He hated it. He flew it anyway. Then came the training. The 7th Air Force's own after-action study would later put it bluntly. The victory was built in rehearsal. Missile employment, MiG maneuverability, how the 21 turns, how it climbs, how it attacks, radio discipline, fuel management, tank jettison, formation integrity, over and over until the disguise worked without thinking. Because the entire plan balanced on one assumption, that North Vietnamese controllers would read their scopes the way they'd read them 100 times before. That habit beats suspicion. The date was set, New Year's Day 1967, and the weather said no. The monsoon closed in and the mission slipped 24 hours. Everyone understood what that meant. Every day a secret sits on the shelf is a day it can leak. Another day a pattern shows up where no pattern should be. January 2nd. The weather was still marginal. Low cloud over the delta, murk over the target. On the ground, crews waited by loaded aircraft. Then, in the afternoon, the word came, go. 14 flights of F-4s launched, from Thailand and from Da Nang, the largest fighter package yet assembled for a single mission over North Vietnam. And the plan began to break almost immediately. The weather was worse than forecast. Flights couldn't get through. Some turned back. Of the 14 flights the trap was built from, only 3 would make it to the target area that day. 3 flights, 12 fighters. The perfect ambush. 7 flights of bait, 7 flights of door. Came down to 12 airplanes over Hanoi. Olds had one chance left, and he knew it. He could call it off. He led the first flight in himself. And at 1500 local time, the trap, half broken, barely holding together, was sprung. North of Hanoi, the radars at GCI showed a picture that was routine by now. A strike coming in from the west. Thunder Chief formation, Thunder Chief altitude, Thunder Chief chatter on the radio. The controllers didn't hesitate. MiG-21 scrambled off Phuc Yen and Noi Bai, climbed up under the cloud deck, and got vectored toward the rear of the formation, just like the 100 times before. Easy prey. Except this time, the prey was listening. Olds' flight passed over Phuc Yen once. Olds looked down, nothing moving. No MiGs in the air, nothing on the taxiways. He made a second pass. Later, he'd admit there was a moment when he thought the fish weren't coming. And then the clouds opened. Silver darts popping up out of the murk, exactly where GCI had told them the bombers would be. MiG-21s climbing into the rear of the formation at full power. What happened next was the entire plan in one motion. The bombers dropped their fuel tanks, lit their afterburners, and turned into the attackers. Put yourself in that MiG cockpit for 1 second. You've been handed an easy kill, a fat, slow Thunder Chief. You come up behind it fast, and the Thunder Chief lights 2 orange flames and rolls toward you like a fighter. That is the moment the trap closes. Olds told the story of that first pass honestly, because it did not go the way legends are supposed to. One MiG popped up right at his 6 o'clock. Olds broke hard left, trusting his wingman to handle it. Then a second MiG came out of the clouds in a wide turn, 1.5 miles away, 11 o'clock. Olds went after it, fired, and watched it vanish back into the murk. He missed. The first fish got away. He'd say so himself. But a third MiG popped out almost immediately, 10 o'clock, crossing from his right to his left. And now Olds flew the move the whole wing had rehearsed. He pulled the nose up hard, about 45 degrees, inside the MiG's turn, then rolled right across it. Fighter pilots call it a vector roll. You don't chase the enemy's airplane. You put your airplane where the enemy's airplane is about to be. He settled the MiG into his sights and gave him 2 sidewinders. 1 hit. Olds said it blew the wing clean off. Robin Olds, the World War II ace, had his first kill in Vietnam. Across the sky, the rest of the force was in. Chappie James's Ford flight had MiGs swarming on them. John Stone's Randler flight found them too. For under 15 minutes, the air over Phuc Yen was one swirling furball of phantoms and fishbeds, tearing in and out of the clouds. Glimpses of swept wings and red stars, gone again in a second. Every phantom flew with 2 clocks running against it, missiles and fuel. Every second of afterburner over Hanoi was a second subtracted from the ride home. Pilots fought the fight with one eye on the enemy and one eye on the gauges. And one by one, the MiGs started coming down. 2 here, 2 there, another one out of a turning fight at the edge of the formation. 7 MiG-21s confirmed, 2 more claimed as probables. And on the American side of the board, the number nobody in the Wolfpack would ever forget, 0. Not one phantom lost. It was the biggest single-day air-to-air victory of the Vietnam War. 12 F-4s, 3 flights, 12 minutes. And almost half of North Vietnam's MiG-21 force gone in one afternoon. The surviving MiGs broke off and ran. The Phantoms, missiles spent and fuel low, turned for Thailand. On the ride home, the radios were quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when men are trying to believe what just happened. Back at Ubon, the gun camera film was already being pulled. The intelligence people started their counting. And across the Red River Delta, in bunkers that had run 100 successful intercepts, the North Vietnamese were doing the same math. Their controllers had followed every rule that had worked for 2 years. They had vectored fighters onto a strike package that looked perfect, and the fighters were slaughtered. The question now was simple. What do you do when the sky itself starts lying to you? Hanoi's answer came fast, and it was silence. The numbers argued. The Americans claimed 7 MiG-21s confirmed and 2 probables. The North Vietnamese admitted 5, but it didn't matter. Either way, nearly half of the MiG-21 force was gone in one afternoon. The Air Force that had made the routes north a killing ground was suddenly an Air Force without fighters. MiG-21 operations stopped. The fishbeds were grounded. For months. Officially for retraining. New tactics, new procedures. Unofficially because nobody wanted to be the next pilot vectored into a trap. When the MiGs finally came back up around January 5th, they flew into a second, smaller version of the same trick, a bait built around reconnaissance flights, and lost 2 more aircraft. Then the sky went quiet again. For the American strike packages, the difference was immediate. MiG alerts dropped off. Losses fell. The airspace over North Vietnam, the most dangerous on Earth for 2 years, didn't become safe. Nothing over North Vietnam was safe. But it became survivable. The 7th Air Force wrote its after-action study, and the conclusion read like a manual. The success came from planning that anticipated exactly how the enemy would react, from training that left nothing to improvisation, from discipline in the air and on the radio. In one line, the Americans didn't win with better airplanes. They won with a better idea. Decades later, the Air Force Historical Foundation would call Operation Bolo the most dramatic use of tactical deception in the entire war. The men got their silver stars. Chappie James, who led Ford flight through the furball, went on to make history of his own. In 1975, Daniel Chappie James Jr. became the first black 4-star general in the history of the United States Air Force. And Robin Olds? Olds grew a mustache, a huge, bushy, regulation-breaking handlebar. In the Air Force of 1967, that was quiet mutiny. His pilots loved it. The Air Force tolerated it because nobody argued facial hair with a man shooting down MiGs. In May 1967, Olds shot down his fourth MiG over North Vietnam, the only pilot in Air Force history to become an ace in 2 wars. When he finally rotated home, the Air Force made him shave the mustache off. He did. But the photograph had already traveled around the world, and the mustache is still the most famous one in American aviation. And there's one more name from January 2nd, 1967, that history doesn't get to skip. One of the young MiG pilots tangled with Olds that afternoon and lived. By some accounts, he was flying the fishbed that Olds' first missiles damaged and lost in the clouds. His name was Nguyen Van Kock. Over the next 2 years, he came back again and again, and he shot down 9 American aircraft, more than any other pilot of the war. Bolo had taught the North Vietnamese the cost of flying out of habit. Nguyen Van Kock learned that lesson best. Never fight the same fight twice. And here's the part no film about this day can skip, because it's the part that makes it Vietnam. Operation Bolo could never be repeated. The North Vietnamese rewrote their procedures. The political restrictions that made Bolo necessary stayed exactly as they were. The war ground on for 6 more years. Rolling Thunder, Linebacker, Paris, Watergate, the withdrawal. In 1975, North Vietnamese tanks rolled into Saigon. 12 perfect minutes did not change the outcome of the war. Nothing 12 minutes long ever could. But Bolo changed something else. It became the textbook. Every Air Force on Earth studied it, because it proved that deception, not speed, not missiles, not money, is the cheapest weapon in the arsenal. If you can make the enemy see what he expects to see, instead of what is actually there, you have already won half the fight. Robin Olds proved it on the afternoon of January 2nd, 1967, with 3 flights, 12 fighters, and a costume made of radio calls and jamming pods. The MiGs had spent 2 years hunting bombers that couldn't fight back. That gray afternoon, they finally caught one. It wasn't a bomber, and the sky over Hanoi was never quite the same again.